So, I got a question. When did we eliminate slavery in the United States? If your answer is, we've never actually eliminated slavery in the United States, then you would be correct. Because the 13th Amendment says that we can conscript people into working from prisons. Because we never did it. Now, there's a lefty part of me that wants to scream about wage slavery, but that's not what we're talking about right now. We're talking about actual, you have to do work that you don't want to fucking do at all. Slavery. And you can be punished for not doing it. Slavery. So, we'll get into the topic after fan art and a quick announcement. So, first of all, we have this piece of fan art right here, which seems to be emulating the leggy Suris. Yeah, I can just put them on right now. Those legs don't work really well with the 3D model, do they? Not at all. But decided to put up a leggy Suris on here. And this piece was done by, I'm totally not clicking Discord to find their name real quick, Still Nightwing. They said they don't usually draw women, but they need practice. Well, joke's on you. I'm a guy. And then we have Summer Suris, which was drawn by Taylor Allen, the cute little swimsuit Suris from the stream. This was drawn the very first day that I did the beach Suris, so the one that I'm using right now. So it was, the fact that this was made within like minutes of me going live was astounding to me, and it is totally my Twitter profile picture now because it looks fucking awesome. As always, thank you all for your fan art submissions. If you want to submit fan art so you can have it shown on the channel, please drop it into the Discord. A couple of things before we get into anything else right now. First of all, if you haven't subscribed already, please consider doing so. And secondly, after notifications are hitting all that other fun stuff, we have merch. If you did not know, we actually have the Uwu Wars, the Owo Wars, and then both of them combined here, depending on your preference. These are all made by YaraKoro, and if you click on any one of these, then you can get YaraKoro's wonderful artwork on a hat, on a mousepad, on a shirt. You can even get it on an iPhone case, a Samsung Galaxy case. You can get it as pretty much anything that you could want, even a framed art print of it, if that's a thing that you want. All kinds of stuff. Coasters. You can get fucking coasters. You'd even get a pin. Literally, any amount of things that you could potentially want. Yara's wonderful artwork will be on that. Links will be in the description, so please check in there so that you can grab anything that you might potentially want. Alright, with that said, let's go ahead and get into the topic itself. I am not super happy about this, but so, this is an older article, but remember that this is something that is still going on today. This article's from only 2 years ago, and the 13th Amendment still exists, so this is still happening right now, unfortunately. Also, how's it going, Ellie? How you doing in the chat? So, for those who don't know what the 13th Amendment does and says, before we read the article in full, let's go ahead and check this out. Neither slavery nor involuntary servitude, except as punishment for crime whereof the party shall have been duly convicted, shall exist within the United States or any place subject to their jurisdiction. Now, the 13th Amendment is important in U.S. history because this is a thing that allowed us to no longer have slavery in the U.S., or at least that's what we're told in our history books. But then we read the actual wording of it, and oh no, if you go to prison for anything, and remember, in America, you can go to prison for drugs. You can go to prison for, you know, even harmless drugs. You can go to prison for possession of those. So, if you happen to smoke weed, I personally don't, but if you do, that's on you, and you get sent into jail as a result of it, and then you get convicted, then congratulations, you can be a slave in the United States because the 13th Amendment is still a thing. But it gets a little weirder. Because if you remember, during Donald Trump's presidency, there were all kinds of pushes for the border wall, anti-immigration, all that other stupid stuff. Let's read the article, but keep that in mind that all went on for this. Prison inmates are picking fruits and vegetables at a rate not seen since Jim Crow. Convict leasing for agriculture, a system that allows states to sell prison labor to private farms, became infamous in the late 1800s for the brutal conditions it imposed on captive, mostly black workers. Again, we have a higher proportion of black people that are convicted at a higher rate for crimes in the United States, so the majority of a disproportionate amount of people who are working these jobs are going to end up being African Americans anyway. Federal and state laws prohibited convict leasing for most of the 20th century, but the once notorious practice is making a comeback. Under lucrative arrangements, states are increasingly leasing prisoners to private corporations to harvest food for American consumers. I'll go ahead and zoom this in a bit so you guys can read a little bit better. Why is this happening now? Well, according to the article, the U.S. food system relies on cheap labor. Today, the median income for farm workers is $10.66 an hour, with 33% of farm working households living below the poverty line. Considering that a living wage, a full livable wage in Georgia is about $22 an hour, yeah, $10.66 an hour for a majority of these households, even in cheaper to live in rural areas, is highway robbery. Historically, agriculture has suppressed wages and eschewed worker protections by hiring from vulnerable groups, notably undocumented immigrants. You don't have to pay benefits to undocumented immigrants, so it makes sense why they would do that. Now, is it ethical for them to do it that way? No, it's not. But from a purely business perspective, when you're only going for profit, that is, of course, what they're going to do. By some estimates, 70% of agriculture is 1.2 million workers. 70% of the 1.2 million workers who are in agriculture are undocumented immigrants. Now, why is that important? Because with the anti-immigrant policies that were pushed under the Trump era and are still in effect in a lot of ways today, the amount of labor available when 70% of your labor are illegal immigrants goes down. But you still need food production in America. That's a thing that you can't get away from. You have to feed your populace somehow. We'll continue on the article, but I think you know where this is going. As current anti-immigration policies diminish the supply of migrant workers, both documented and undocumented, farmers are not able to find the labor they need. So in states like Arizona and Idaho and Washington that grow labor-intensive crops like onions, apples, and tomatoes, prison systems have responded by leasing convicts to growers desperate for workers. Now, I have a question. If you are in the prison system, how many options do you really have here? 13th Amendment says you can legally be conscripted to work. You can legally be thrown into slavery. That's the thing that can happen to you. Of course, the potato state would do this. Racist roots of convict leasing. Since Reconstruction, states have used prisoners to solve labor supply problems in industries such as railroad construction, mining, and agriculture. But convict leasing has been a powerful weapon of white supremacy for now anti-immigrant sentiment. After emancipation, Southern economies faced a crisis: how to maintain a racial caste system and a supply of surplus labor that black people were now free in America. Southern states passed vagrancy laws, black codes, and other legislation to selectively incarcerate freed slaves. For example, under Mississippi's vagrancy law, all black men had to provide written proof of a job or face a $50 fine. Those who could not pay were forced to work for any man willing to pay the fine, usually a white man. It says white man specifically here in the article, but I'm going to assume that there were people who weren't white that could pay the fine as well. The amount would be deducted from the wage that they would get during that. During the late 1800s, mass incarceration increased the army of cheap labor that could be leased to private businesses for substantial profit. In 1886, state revenues from leasing exceeded the cost of running prisons by nearly 400%. Between 1870 and 1910, 88% of convicts leased in Georgia were black. Oh boy, my state! That makes me so excited. And by excited, I mean very fucking thoroughly disgusted. It's amazing how bad things actually get in Georgia. Now, you can even see juvenile convicts being used as workers in the fields in 1903 in this picture. But the populist response: cheap convict labor also suppressed wages for free white people, and by 1900, poor white people began pushing back. In 1904, James Vardaman was elected governor of Mississippi on a platform of returning white people to work and black people to confinement. That is quite the issue, but the citation is from a book called Worse Than Slavery, Parchment Farm and the Ordeal of Jim Crow Justice. So that is a book that you could read if you would like to get some more information on what happened there. Continuing on, these populist white supremacist sentiments dovetailed with national economic concerns during the Great Depression, when agricultural failures led to widespread unemployment. Now, we get to the 30s, and the Asher-Sunners Act and accompanying state laws prohibited convict leasing and the sale of prisoner-made goods on the open market. Inmates still worked in agriculture, but the food they produced had to be consumed by other prisoners or state workers. Now, that's not much better, but it does at least remove some of the profit incentive if you don't consider the fact that we can have for-profit prisons in many cases, and therefore the profit incentive is still fucking there. This is literally just kicking the can another couple of inches down the road. By the late 1970s, with growing competition from foreign manufacturing, U.S. companies sought out domestic sources of cheap labor. Under pressure from corporate lobbies like the American Legislative Exchange Council, Congress relaxed restrictions on convict leasing with the Justice System Improvement Act. As the manufacturing and service sectors began hiring prisoners, agriculture expanded its use of migrant workers. Now, basically, as you have more migrant workers who are exploited under these systems, you have less need for prison labor. So you have to pick your poison. Now, hiring migrant workers is not in and of itself a bad thing, but we know that the wages of these workers get suppressed. But what do you do? How do you properly fight for an industry of people who are not documented, who we can't actually look at on paper the same way we can many documented workers who aren't being paid under the table? It's a lot harder to fight that battle because the company is going to be vehemently denying the fact that they even employ several of these people to begin with for legal reasons. But when you throw into that mix the anti-immigration policies and the fewer migrants coming into the United States, those positions are still very, very low-wage positions. Incredibly low-wage positions. So when you factor in the fact that they need to replace those positions with equally low-wage workers, and not everybody is going to go do back-breaking labor for incredibly low wages, in comes your prison population. And none of this is good. In an ideal world, the agricultural industry would be paying people what they're actually worth and wouldn't have to rely on prison labor, because in paying people what they're actually worth, you could get more people out there working those fields doing that job. But the reliance on people that it could pay under the table is a bad thing. Even if paying people who are undocumented is not in and of itself a bad thing. Now, most wages paid to inmates are garnished by prisons to cover incarceration costs and pay victim restitution programs. In some cases, prisoners see none of the monetary compensation whatsoever that they have actually earned. Talk about extracting profits. In 2015 and 2016, the California Prison Industry Authority made over $2 million from its food and agricultural sector. Growers can reap significant revenues too. Inmates are excluded from federal minimum wage protections, allowing prison systems to lease convicts at a rate below the going labor rate. In Arizona, inmates leased through Arizona Correctional Industries received a wage of $3 to $4 per hour before deductions. Meanwhile, the state's minimum wage for non-incarcerated workers is $11 an hour. Beyond the unfairness of low wages, inadequate state and federal regulations ensure that agricultural work continues to be onerous. Laborers endure long hours, repetitive motion injuries, temperature and humidity extremes, and exposure to caustic and carcinogenic chemicals. For inmates, these circumstances are unlikely to change, since U.S. courts have ruled that prisoners are prohibited from organizing for higher wages and working conditions. Strikes have occurred in recent years, but in America, you're not allowed to stop a union from happening. You're not allowed to union bust. But you are allowed to stop a union from happening in your prison sector, and you are allowed to stop a union from happening through corporate propaganda, and you are allowed to do literally anything short of hiring someone to assassinate an organizer of a union. Because here in America, we value our labor so much, we fuck the entire labor force. And then enslave their children. Because they smoked weed once. Welcome to America. Isn't it wonderful? Isn't it great? Land of the free? All that other fun stuff? Jesus fucking Christ. Furthermore, inmates are not legally considered employees, which is important because if we were to talk about what's going on with Blizzard right now, they've started changing the names of all of their people who work for them from employees to workers because there's different legal protections for employees that do not apply to workers. By not legally considering inmates employees, they are excluded from any protections under Part 1964 of the Civil Rights Act. They are excluded from things from the Equal Pay Act. They are excluded from things from the Fair Labor Standards Act. And so on and so forth. Now, we could continue to the end of the article, but I think you basically get the idea. The idea is slavery never left in America. It never really did. It just morphed into a different form that isn't seen by the public eye anywhere near as often, and can be justified better. Once upon a time, Americans were able to justify the enslavement of black people in the United States because they were racially inferior, according to the social zeitgeist of the time. They were able to enslave black people because they bought them and they therefore own their children and their children's children, and so on and so forth. Figure out any kind of apologetic you can, whether it's dehumanizing, whether it's just, oh, everybody thought that way, it doesn't matter. Fact of the matter is, we had slavery then, and we have it now. But we can't justify enslaving people just because of the color of their skin. But we can justify enslaving people because they did something wrong one time, apparently. And again, this does disproportionately affect African Americans still, so we literally have created a system where we can go, yes, we stopped enslaving black people. Except for the ones that we didn't, because we're America. Now, it gets even worse when you consider the fact that people who have been to prison for any amount of time, for any reason, as Alpacent points out, being a convicted felon, it fucks you in the job market. So imagine going from you're forced to be a slave if the government so chooses that you can be, or a private industry decides that you should be, to not being able to get a high-paying job later on down the road, or at least being excluded from several of them because you were imprisoned at one point. That is some of the most dehumanizing shit. And remember, America has one of the highest rate of prisoner recidivism, which means that we have a revolving door prison system. When people get incarcerated, the likelihood of them becoming incarcerated again should they leave the prison system is higher here than in any other country. And that's because we don't focus on reform and we don't focus on support networks for people who get out of prison. And we don't let the punishments stop happening to people once they get out. There's always some cost once you leave. They can be costs you incurred while you were in the prison system to begin with. They can be costs that are incurred socially. They can be ostracization of family. It doesn't matter. Fact of the matter is, it changes your life forever. And you only get one of those. It's not like you can just hit the reset button on the game and suddenly you're back in and you're just going to live the best life this time and not get caught doing anything at all, even stuff that really shouldn't be considered a crime in the first place. You don't get that option. You only get the one chance. Once your life is fucked, it's fucked. F-U-C-K, gone. So, now I gotta throw the question back to you guys. Do you think any of this is fair? Do you think the 13th Amendment is fair in what it does? Do you think enslaving prison labor is a good thing? Is this something that we should keep or something that we should throw away? Hopefully I've made my position on that abundantly clear, but I want to hear yours in the comment section below. So let me know if you are listening over on YouTube. And if you are over there, please consider hitting the subscribe button and the follow button over on Twitch if you haven't already. Consider checking out the merch area in the description below. And if you want to support via Patreon or anything else, then those options are available as well. But with that said, as always, everyone, insert end of video tagline here.